After stumbling a bit last year, Michigan has been recruiting at an elite level again, but will the Jim Harbaugh suspension controversy set them back on the recruiting trail? Let's bring on Michigan insider EJ Holland of the Wolverine. EJ, we'll talk about Harbaugh's suspension here in a minute, but first, this weekend, four-star safety Zaquan Patterson out of Chaminade Madonna High School down in South Florida, the number 3 ranked DB in the country. He's going to be making his decision. Now, Miami's been trending heavily, but FSU, Michigan, Auburn also involved. What is the latest where Michigan stands as we're just 48 hours out?
I think Michigan's in second place right now. I know there have been some conflicting reports, even within the network. I know you had the Auburn guy on not too long ago, and he said that it seemed more like an Auburn-Michigan race. But I'm hearing a lot about Florida State. They've recently made a big surge. I know talking to those around the Michigan program, Florida State is of the most concern. What Florida State has done recently, obviously they are a team on the rise on the recruiting trail, landing some elite level talent on the back end. And I think they've done a nice job with NIL as well, where Michigan is still figuring out that aspect. And I think those are the two biggest factors counting against Michigan right now is a lack of a plan from an NIL perspective on the recruiting trail, as well as distance away from home. Now, Michigan did impress Zaquan Patterson on his 2 unofficial visits this summer. Getting him back-to-back on campus was huge in June and then again in July for the barbecue at the Big House. I think, again, they really impressed him and his mother. The opportunity for early playing time is there. He has a friend in Chris Ewald who's committed to Michigan. So I think that all of that is playing a positive role in regards to Michigan. But right now I would give Florida State the slight advantage heading into the weekend. I think Michigan's going to continue to keep working on this, continue to work hard. I think Auburn's still in the mix there. I think Miami has fallen off a bit, but you can never, completely dismiss Miami based on what they've done on the recruiting trail the last couple of cycles. So that's kind of how I see it right now.
So what's Michigan done to position themselves in, a spot where maybe they can jump up and grab Zaquan on Saturday?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned, I think the 2 back-to-back visits in the summer were big. The first one in June was the first time his mother made his way to Ann Arbor. So I think that's when she got a real in-depth look at what Michigan was about from a culture perspective, from an academic perspective, and just how they develop players. And I think that really impressed not just his mom, but obviously Zaquan as well. And like I mentioned, he has a good friend committed in Chris Ewald, a top 100 cornerback in the 2025 cycle. They're teammates at Chaminade Madonna, but they also grew up in the same youth program with DEF CON. They travel around the country, play 7-on-7 together. I feel like that connection is definitely a big help. And Michigan doesn't have a safety committed this cycle. Zaquan's been the guy for the majority of this year and even last year as a junior. So I think all of that is definitely working in Michigan's favor. I'm not counting out Michigan either. I know I may sound pessimistic giving Florida State the edge, but either way, this one's not going to be over. Zaquan's on record saying he's going to make official visits in the fall, and he was penciled in to make it to Ann Arbor for the game against Ohio State for his OB. So we'll see if that ends up happening regardless of where he commits this weekend.
All right. Well, EJ, 2 days until the big decision. Give me your final prediction on where Zaquan Patterson goes to school.
I will say it is Florida State this weekend, and we'll see on signing day in December.
Let's switch gears here for a minute and talk a little 2025 QB recruiting because the dominoes are already starting to fall. Number 1 QB Bryce Underwood out of Belleville, Michigan is a top target for the Wolverines. But Inside Scoop fans, listen up. I need to tell you about these bird dog shorts that I've been wearing. I just got back from vacation down in Florida last weekend, and boy, it was hot. I live in Nashville now, and I've been wearing my bird dogs to work for a couple months. Then I started wearing them to golf. I love them because they're way more flexible than my old stiff khakis. And let me tell you, when I was down in Florida, boy, it gets swampy down there. It gets swampy down there, if you know what I mean, but not me because I brought my bird dogs and I had them on the entire trip. Bird Dogs has a great cloud knit fabric that looks just like a nice pair of khakis, but way more flexible. And most importantly, it keeps you cool and dry, even in the Florida swamp. So here's what we're going to do. I need you to go to birddogs.com/Josh or enter promo code Josh for a free Bird Dog Tech hat with your order. Got it right here, actually. This Bird Dog Tech hat is great. I wear it on the golf course all the time. It looks great, fits great. So go to birddogs.com/Josh or promo code Josh for a Bird Dogs hat. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. Okay, EJ, we are back to Bryce Underwood, the number one quarterback in the 25 class. Where do the Wolverines stand right now with him?
I think top two right now with LSU. I think that was one of the biggest storylines coming out of July. Just a couple of weeks ago, he made, or not a couple of weeks ago, about a month ago now, he made two unofficial visits, one to LSU, one to Michigan. So he had a multi-day visit to LSU, spent some time in Baton Rouge around Brian Kelly and that staff, and then immediately flew back home to Michigan and made an unofficial visit for the last day of the barbecue at the Big House, which is Michigan's annual big recruiting event at the end of July. And I think he's developed a really strong relationship with new Michigan quarterbacks coach Kurt Campbell. But as you know, with five-star quarterbacks or any high-profile quarterbacks, it's going to come down to Jim Harbaugh. I mean, he's the head coach. He's the guy that played quarterback at Michigan. He played quarterback in the league. He's going to have to personally win this recruitment for the Wolverines. I think Jim has done a fantastic job. I think that Bryce Underwood does have a wandering eye to play in the South. He really loves what LSU has done recently. Obviously, they have a lot to pitch as well with the new staff, and just the opportunity to play in the SEC is something that's really appealing to him. I think it's a heated battle right now. He's been to Michigan a bazillion times. He's been to LSU multiple times. I think it's really going to come down to how these two teams recruit him in the fall. I'm also interested to see how much NIL becomes a factor. And I know that sounds probably redundant on your show, but when you're talking about the number one prospect in the country at the most important position in football, NIL is going to creep up at some point. Now, again, as I said earlier in the show, Michigan doesn't have a concrete recruiting plan. I think that's hindered them a bit on the recruiting trail, but they have been able to, win some tough battles this cycle. They obviously have had a ton of success on the field. They have a lot to pitch with Jim Harbaugh's resume as a quarterback guy. So it'll be interesting to see it. And like I said, it's a hometown school. He's been there so much. He's familiar with the program. He knows guys on the team. And Underwood's making a pretty early decision, relative. He's deciding in January. And I think that gives Michigan time to pivot to other options if they miss out on Underwood. And it also allows them to really make Underwood the focus. They're going to keep in contact with other quarterbacks like Husan Longstreet and Ryan Montgomery. But right now, they're not going to accept the commitment until they know where Bryce Underwood's going. And, luckily for them, he's deciding in January. But I think it's a really tight battle. I mean, I wouldn't really give an edge one way or the other.
All right, EJ. Now, Michigan has other big battles that they've won in the 24 cycle, and they've also lost some. Now, Michigan did get off to a quick start this cycle. They recruited at an elite level for much of the offseason, but something feels a little different now. Recent flip of Elias Rudolph to Miami and potentially losing the Smith twins to Kentucky. Is Michigan losing a little traction heading into the season?
Yeah, they've lost a little bit of steam. When you look at Michigan earlier in the cycle, it looked like they were going to be in contention for a top 3 recruiting class. There was a ton of buzz. I remember I came on the show, I think it was in the spring, Josh, and we were talking about just, trickle down of commits, just sliding into the class. And it seemed like Michigan was back after a really disappointing cycle last year. But recently they've kind of capped out. They had some big misses in the summer with some really important targets. They moved down to number 9 in the On3 industry rankings. I think I checked this morning, and that's exactly where they were. So they've been on a slide. And if you check I always like to use this tool, but if you check the average commit rating, I think Michigan's down at like 17. And they already have 27 commits. So I'm not sure how much more upside there is in the class. There's just limited targets. They're going to have to work to flip some guys, potentially get a guy like Elias Rudolph back in the class. They're going to have to work to keep guys like Gerard Smith and Jacob Smith, who you mentioned, the Smith twins, trending to Kentucky now. So I think it's just been a rough couple of months for Michigan, and it's hard to put a finger on why, other than just using NIL as the excuse, I guess.
Well,
but
what about the news of Jim Harbaugh's suspension? Is that playing into this at all, or is it just kind of the ebbs and flows of recruiting?
I think it's more so the ebbs and flows of recruiting, and like I said, maybe some NIL as well. I think that's the biggest disadvantage for Michigan on the recruiting trail. But in terms of Jim Harbaugh's suspension, I'm not sure that's really playing a role at all. Either way, I mean, when you look at the field, Michigan has a cupcake schedule. I think they can beat the Bowling Greens of the world without Jim Harbaugh. So I don't think it's going to have too much of an effect. Jim Harbaugh has done a fantastic job of selling kids and families on the culture he's built. The evidence is there: back-to-back Big Ten championships, back-to-back wins over Ohio State, back-to-back college football playoff appearances. I mean, his resume as a whole, his NFL experience speaks for itself. And the big thing about Michigan, whenever you read all the reports, or whenever recruits are quoted, it's always family, family, family. That's always the quote when you talk about Michigan. It's not just used as a generic quote at other places. I mean, it's literally a family type of atmosphere. So I think the commits are so close, and they really have bought into that family type of pitch, or not really a pitch, but just the feeling around the program, that I don't think the Jim Harbaugh suspension really matters to most of the guys. Now, like I said, you do have some guys like the Smith twins that are looking around. You had Elias Rudolph decommit, but like you mentioned, it's a recruiting cycle. It's a long game. You might have a short spurt of success here and there, and you think you're at the top, and all of a sudden things can go wrong. But things can also go well in the fall. Michigan has historically never started this fast early on the recruiting trail. They always close strong, and so the opportunity is still there. Even with the limited spots for them to close strong with another successful season. Let's say Michigan lives up to expectations. They win another Big Ten championship. They beat Ohio State at home in the Big House in front of all these recruits. You never know what can happen. So I think right now the Jim Harbaugh suspension is probably, next to last on the list of items that Michigan fans need to worry about from a recruiting perspective.
All right. Yeah, you're right. Hey, they're on a little recruiting slide right now, but probably the best thing for them is for the season to start, because we know they're going to rack up wins. We know they're going to have a chance to win the conference. We know they're going to have a chance to make the college football playoffs again. So we'll see. Michigan has a top 10 class right now, sitting at number 9, like you said. Can they push for a top 5 class once the season begins? EJ Holland, thank you for joining us today on the Inside Scoop. Thank you for watching. Make sure you smash that subscribe button for me, and remember to check out all the videos on the On3 YouTube page.